Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Atlanta winters never get truly cold, but that New Year's Eve carried a sharp bite that made everyone rush from their cars into the warmth of the house. I had driven down from Nashville that morning, 5 hours on the highway with nothing but podcasts and coffee to keep me company, chasing an invitation my friend Brianne had extended back in October. She lived in this gorgeous old Victorian near Grant Park, a shared house with 5 other people, the kind of place with wraparound porches and rooms that seemed to multiply the further you walked inside. 6 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, a basement someone had converted into a game room with a pool table and vintage arcade cabinets. My 10-year high school reunion a few months earlier had reminded me how isolated I had become, working remotely as a data analyst, sometimes going 4 or 5 days without speaking to another human face to face. When Brianne promised this party would be legendary, that word felt like medicine. I pulled up around 7 in the evening on December 31st, 2024, and the house already pulsed with preparation. People strung lights across the porch railings, someone tested a DJ booth in the main living room, and coolers lined the hallway like they were waiting for inspection. By 10, the place was packed with maybe 70 or 80 people. Brianne had spread the word through her yoga studio. Her roommates invited co-workers and friends, and those people brought their own circles until the guest list became this living organism nobody could fully track. The energy felt electric and warm despite the freezing night outside. I had planted myself near the kitchen island, nursing a whiskey and talking to a guy named Jerome who worked in urban planning and had this infectious laugh that pulled everyone nearby into his orbit. Music thumped through the floorboards, people danced in clusters throughout the house, and strangers kept introducing themselves with that easy friendliness that only exists when everyone shares the same countdown anticipation. I remember feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months, like driving those 5 hours had been exactly the right call. The house seemed to breathe with all that collective joy, windows fogging from body heat contrasting against the cold outside. I had no idea that in less than 3 hours, I would be lying face down on that same kitchen floor with a gun pressed against the back of my skull. Around 11, I noticed a group of people I had not seen earlier in the night. 4 guys and 2 women, maybe late 20s, dressed nicely enough to blend in, but carrying themselves with a certain tension that registered somewhere in the back of my mind without fully surfacing. One of the guys wore a fitted black jacket and had a shaved head with a tattoo creeping up the side of his neck, something geometric that disappeared under his collar. He kept scanning the rooms like he was taking inventory, his eyes moving in quick, systematic sweeps while his friends laughed and grabbed drinks from the cooler. I told myself they were just new arrivals, friends of friends of friends, part of the endless chain of connections that had filled this house. Jerome had wandered off to find the bathroom, so I poured myself another whiskey and watched the group split up. 2 of them headed toward the basement stairs, another pair drifted into the back hallway where the bedrooms were, and the remaining 2 stayed in the living room near the front door. Looking back now, I can see they were positioning themselves. At the time, I just thought they were exploring the house like everyone else did when they first arrived. The countdown started at 11:58, everyone crowding into the main living room with champagne glasses and plastic cups raised high. Brianne had climbed onto a chair near the DJ booth, her face flushed and happy, leading the chant as the numbers descended. I found myself squeezed between Jerome, who had reappeared with a bottle of cheap Prosecco, and a woman named Valerie who taught kindergarten and kept adjusting the glittery tiara on her head. The whole room vibrated with voices shouting in unison, 10, 9, 8, and I felt that surge of collective hope that comes with watching one year die and another begin. When we hit 0, confetti exploded from somewhere near the ceiling. People screamed and hugged and kissed whoever stood closest. I hugged Jerome, then Valerie, then a complete stranger who smelled like peppermint schnapps. The champagne tasted like victory, like new beginnings. like every cliché about fresh starts that I had desperately needed to believe. Somewhere in that chaos of celebration, those 6 strangers were locking the back door and pulling weapons from under their jackets. The first scream came from the basement around 12:15, but most people thought it was just someone celebrating too hard. The music kept pumping, conversations kept flowing, and I had wandered back to the kitchen to grab some water because the whiskey was starting to make my head swim. That was when the guy with the neck tattoo walked in with a pistol in his hand, followed by one of the women holding what looked like a sawed-off shotgun against her hip. He did not yell or make a scene at first. He just pointed the gun at me and said very calmly, "Get on the floor, face down, hands behind your head." His voice had no panic in it, no adrenaline shake, just the flat tone of someone following a rehearsed script. I dropped so fast my knees cracked against the tile. Within seconds, 3 other people in the kitchen were beside me. A girl in a sequined dress crying quietly into the floor, and 2 guys who kept asking what was happening. What the hell was happening? The woman with the shotgun stood by the doorway while her partner zip-tied our wrists behind our backs, pulling the plastic so tight I could feel my pulse throbbing in my fingertips. The screaming started for real after that, spreading through the house like wildfire as the other members of the group revealed themselves in different rooms. I could hear furniture crashing somewhere above us, heavy footsteps thundering across the old hardwood, voices shouting commands to get down, shut up, hand it over. From my position on the kitchen floor, cheek pressed against cold tile that smelled like spilled beer, I could only see boots moving back and forth and hear the chaos unfolding in fragments. Someone was sobbing in the next room, deep-wrenching sobs that sounded like they came from a grown man. Glass shattered somewhere, maybe a window, maybe a mirror. The guy with the neck tattoo crouched down next to me and pressed the barrel of his gun against the base of my skull, the metal so cold it burned, and asked where the safe was. I told him I did not live here, I was just visiting. I did not know anything about a safe. He pressed harder, grinding the barrel into my scalp, and asked again. His breath smelled like cigarettes and something sweet, maybe the rum punch Brienne had made. Brienne. The thought of her hit me like a punch to the chest. I had no idea where she was in all this chaos, if she was safe, if she was hurt, if she was even still in the house. The guy must have seen something change in my face because he laughed, this low chuckle that had no humor in it, and told me not to worry about my friends right now. He said I should worry about myself, about giving them what they wanted so everyone could go home with all their fingers attached. That specific detail, the fingers, made something inside me go very still and very cold. These were not amateurs grabbing whatever they could and running. They had planned this, studied the house, probably watched the party fill up through the windows before deciding the moment was right. The woman with the shotgun started going through purses and jackets piled on the kitchen counter, dumping wallets and phones into a black duffel bag with mechanical efficiency. She found a laptop in someone's backpack and added that too. The guy finally lifted the gun from my head and moved toward the hallway, barking orders to someone I could not see about checking the bedrooms upstairs. They herded all of us into the main living room over the next 20 minutes, maybe 60 people forced to sit on the floor, with our backs against the walls while 2 of them stood guard with weapons drawn. The DJ booth had been knocked over, equipment scattered across the hardwood, and the champagne glasses we had raised at midnight now lay shattered in glittering piles that cut into people's legs when they shifted position. I found Brienne across the room, her face streaked with mascara and tears, a bruise already forming on her left cheekbone where someone had struck her. Our eyes met and she mouthed something I could not understand. Maybe, "I'm sorry," or "Are you okay?" But I just nodded slightly to let her know I was alive. Jerome sat a few feet away from me, his earlier warmth completely gone, replaced by a pale stillness that made him look like a different person entirely. The group worked the room systematically, taking jewelry, watches, wallets, phones, anything valuable they could strip from the partygoers. One woman near the window refused to give up her engagement ring, said it had been her grandmother's, and one of the guys pistol whipped her so hard she collapsed sideways into the person next to her. Someone had managed to call 911 before the phones were collected, I found out later. A guy named Dennis who worked with one of Brienne's roommates had hidden in the basement bathroom when the chaos started, crouched behind the toilet with his phone's brightness turned all the way down. He whispered the address to the dispatcher, described what was happening, begged them to send help. But it was New Year's Eve in Atlanta, and every cop in the city was dealing with drunk drivers, domestic disputes, celebratory gunfire, bar fights spilling onto sidewalks. The dispatcher told him units were responding, but it might take time given the holiday volume. Dennis stayed on the line for 11 minutes before one of the robbers found him, kicked in the flimsy bathroom door, and dragged him upstairs by his collar. They made an example of him in front of everyone, beating him with the butt of a rifle until his face became something unrecognizable, a mess of blood and swelling that made several people vomit on the floor. The message was clear. Anyone else hiding, anyone else who had tried to call for help, should understand what happened to heroes. I kept my eyes on the hardwood, counting the grain patterns, trying to disappear into myself. The minutes stretched into something elastic and terrible, time losing all meaning when every second feels like it might be your last. The leader, the one with the neck tattoo, seemed to be getting agitated. He kept checking his watch, a nice silver thing he had probably stolen from someone earlier, and exchanging glances with the woman who appeared to be his second in command. They had clearly expected to be done by now, in and out before anyone could respond. But the sheer number of people at the party had slowed them down. More victims meant more valuables, but also more variables, more chances for something to go wrong. I watched him pace near the front door, talking in low, urgent tones with one of his crew, and caught fragments of their conversation. Something about a van, about timing, about leaving soon regardless. The woman guarding our section of the room had started to look nervous too. Her shotgun no longer held with that professional steadiness, but gripped tight like she was afraid someone might rush her. I could feel the energy shifting in the room, the terror mixing with something else now. A desperate calculation happening behind dozens of pairs of eyes as people started to wonder if compliance would actually save them. The sirens came at 1:47 in the morning, distant at first but growing louder, until they seemed to surround the house from every direction. I will never forget the way the leader's face changed when he heard them, that calm professional mask cracking into something raw and furious. He started shouting orders, his crew scrambling to grab the duffel bags stuffed with our belongings, and for one horrible moment I thought they were going to start shooting us to eliminate witnesses. The woman with the shotgun swung her weapon toward the windows like she expected cops to come crashing through at any second. But the leader made a different call. He grabbed Brienne by the hair, yanked her to her feet, and announced that they were taking insurance with them. 2 other robbers grabbed a man I did not recognize, and Valerie, the kindergarten teacher with the glittery tiara now hanging crooked and stained with someone else's blood. They dragged the 3 of them toward the back of the house while the rest of the crew covered their retreat, and I screamed Brienne's name so loud my throat tore. She looked back at me one time, her eyes wide with terror, before she disappeared through the kitchen doorway. The remaining robbers backed out after them, keeping their weapons trained on us until the last possible second, and then they were gone into the cold Georgia night. The police found the 3 hostages 2 hours later, abandoned in the back of a stolen catering van parked behind a strip mall 6 miles away. The robbers had taken what they wanted and vanished, probably switching vehicles somewhere along the way, disappearing into the chaos of New Year's celebrations still raging across the city. Brienne was physically unharmed, but she did not speak for 3 days afterward, just sat in her hospital bed staring at the wall with eyes that looked hollowed out from the inside. Dennis survived but needed reconstructive surgery on his face. The woman who got pistol whipped over her grandmother's ring had a fractured skull and spent 2 weeks in the ICU. The police arrested 2 of the 6 robbers about 3 weeks later, caught them trying to pawn jewelry at a shop in Savannah, but the others were never found, including the man with the neck tattoo. I drove back to Nashville 4 days after it happened, my wrists still bruised purple from the zip ties, and I did not leave my apartment for almost a month. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that kitchen floor, felt that cold metal against my skull, heard Brienne screaming as they dragged her away. It has been almost a year now, And I still cannot go to parties, still flinch when I hear fireworks or champagne corks popping. Some people say time heals everything, but I think that is something people tell themselves so they can sleep at night. Some wounds just become part of you, woven into who you are, and you learn to carry them because the alternative is to stop moving entirely. My girlfriend Nicole and I had been together for almost 3 years when New Year's Eve 2017 rolled around. We were living in a small apartment in Boise, Idaho, both of us working jobs that paid just enough to cover rent and the occasional date night. She was a veterinary technician at an animal clinic near the mall, and I had been doing IT support for a regional insurance company since dropping out of college a few semesters before finishing my degree. That December had been brutal for both of us. Long hours, difficult customers, the kind of exhaustion that makes you want to hide from the world rather than celebrate with it. So when Nicole suggested we skip the downtown festivities and find somewhere quiet to watch the fireworks, just the two of us, I thought it sounded perfect. Neither of us was the type to enjoy packed bars or freezing in a crowd of drunk strangers. We wanted something intimate, something peaceful. I had no idea how wrong that night would go. I knew about a spot called Ridgeline Point, about 40 minutes outside the city, up a winding mountain road that led to a small overlook with a clear view of the valley below. A coworker had mentioned it once. Said he used to take his wife there when they were dating. The drive up was quiet, just the hum of my old Ford Ranger and some acoustic playlist Nicole had put together on her phone. We passed the last gas station around 9, and after that there was nothing but dark pines and the occasional reflective sign warning about deer crossings. The temperature had dropped to around 18 degrees, and a thin layer of frost clung to everything outside the truck. When we finally pulled into the small gravel lot at Ridgeline Point, we were completely alone. The city lights glittered far below us like a scattered handful of orange and white gems, and above us, the sky was impossibly clear, packed with stars you never see when you live surrounded by streetlights. Nicole squeezed my hand and said this was exactly what she needed. I turned off the engine and we sat there in the dark waiting for midnight. We had brought a thermos of hot chocolate and a blanket, and Nicole had even packed some of those little hand warmers you crack and shake. For the first 20 minutes or so, everything was perfect. We talked about the year behind us, about the apartment we wanted to move into come spring, about her sister's wedding in March and whether we could afford the trip to Portland for it. The windows started to fog up from our breath, and I would wipe a little circle clear every now and then to check the view. It was around 11:15 when I noticed it. A light, small and pale, somewhere off to our left where the tree line began. At first I thought it was a reflection, maybe a glare from the city lights bouncing off something metallic, but then it moved. Just a small shift, barely perceptible, but enough to make me sit up straighter. Nicole was mid-sentence about her bridesmaid dress when she noticed me staring and asked what was wrong. I told her I thought I saw something, probably just an animal. She leaned over to look and the light disappeared. We sat in silence for a few seconds, both of us scanning the dark edge of the forest. Nicole laughed nervously and said it was probably a hiker with a headlamp, maybe someone who had the same idea we did and wanted to watch the fireworks from the woods. That made sense. It was New Year's Eve after all, people do strange things. But something about the way that light had moved, deliberate and slow, made the back of my neck prickle. I told myself I was being paranoid, that spending too many nights watching true crime documentaries with Nicole had rotted my brain. I kissed her forehead and told her not to worry. But I kept glancing at that tree line, and about 5 minutes later, I saw it again. Closer this time, not by much, maybe 30 feet from where it had been before. And this time, it stayed on long enough for me to see that it was not a headlamp. It was the glow of a phone screen, held low, illuminating the bottom half of a face. Someone was standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. Nicole saw it too. She grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug through my jacket sleeve. Neither of us said anything for a moment. The figure did not move, did not wave, did not call out. Just stood there maybe 60 yards away, half hidden by the trunk of a massive pine. I could make out what looked like a dark jacket, the shape of broad shoulders, but the phone light clicked off before I could see anything else. My heart was hammering in my chest, and Nicole whispered that we should leave, right now. I agreed. I reached for the keys still dangling from the ignition and turned them. The engine made a sound I had never heard before, a weak, stuttering cough that died almost immediately. I tried again. Same thing. The dashboard lights flickered on for half a second and then went dark. Nicole asked me what was happening, her voice climbing higher, and I told her I did not know. I pumped the gas, turned the key again, and got nothing but a hollow click. The truck was dead. I want to be clear about something. That Ford Ranger was old, sure, a 2004 with over 160,000 miles on it, but I had just had the battery replaced 2 months before. It had started fine when we left the apartment. There was no warning, no slow crank, nothing. One moment it was running, the next it was completely dead, like someone had flipped a switch. Nicole was breathing fast beside me, her eyes fixed on the tree line where we had seen the figure. I told her to stay calm, that maybe it was just the cold affecting the battery, that I would pop the hood and take a look. But when I reached for the door handle, she grabbed my wrist and said no. Do not get out of the truck. She pointed toward the trees and I followed her gaze. The figure had moved again. It was no longer at the tree line. It was standing in the middle of the gravel lot, maybe 40 feet from our front bumper, completely still. No phone light this time. Just a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the city below, watching us with what I can only describe as patience. Nicole fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she tried to unlock it. I kept my eyes on the figure, afraid that if I looked away even for a second, it would be at my window when I looked back. She finally got her phone open and dialed 911, but the call would not connect. No signal. We were too far up the mountain, too far from any cell tower. She tried again, then again, and each time the screen just showed that spinning circle before giving up. I grabbed my own phone and had the same result. We were completely cut off. The figure still had not moved, had not said a word, and somehow that was worse than if it had charged at us screaming. There was something calculating about the stillness, like a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to go. Nicole started crying, quiet sobs that she tried to muffle with her hand. I put my arm around her and told her we were going to be okay, but I did not believe it. My mind was racing through options. Lock the doors, honk the horn, use the truck as a barrier, but none of them seemed like enough. And then the figure took a step forward. It was a slow step, deliberate, almost casual, like someone out for an evening stroll. Then another step, and another. I laid on the horn, pressing it as hard as I could, but nothing happened. No sound. Whatever had killed the battery had killed everything else too. Nicole screamed at me to do something, and I felt completely useless, trapped in this metal box with the woman I loved while something terrible walked toward us. I reached under my seat, hoping to find anything I could use as a weapon, and my fingers closed around a tire iron I had forgotten was there. It was not much, but it was something. I told Nicole that if this thing got to us, I was going to fight. She nodded, mascara running down her cheeks, and grabbed the thermos. Heavy, stainless steel, better than nothing. The figure was maybe 20 feet away now, close enough that I could make out more details. A man, tall, wearing a dark canvas jacket and work boots. His face was still obscured by shadow, but I could see his hands hanging loose at his sides. He was not holding anything. Somehow that scared me more. What kind of person approaches a stranded couple in the middle of nowhere, at night, in the freezing cold, with empty hands and no words? He was 10 feet from the hood of the truck when headlights swept across the lot. For a split second, the man was fully illuminated. Pale skin, a gaunt face with hollow cheeks, eyes that seemed to reflect the light like an animal caught on a highway. He could not have been older than 40, but there was something worn about him, weathered like leather left out in the sun too long. The headlights belonged to a Jeep Wrangler coming up the mountain road, and the driver must have seen us because the vehicle slowed as it entered the lot. The man in the canvas jacket did not run. He did not even flinch. He simply turned, walked back toward the tree line with that same unhurried pace, and disappeared into the darkness between the pines. The whole thing took maybe 5 seconds. Nicole was gripping my arm so tight I thought she might break the skin. The Jeep pulled up beside us and the window rolled down to reveal a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a concerned expression. She asked if we were okay, said she saw someone walking away from our truck and wanted to make sure we were not in trouble. I have never been so relieved to see a stranger in my entire life. I told her our truck would not start, that we had been stranded, that there was a man watching us from the woods. Her expression changed immediately, shifting from concern to something harder, more alert. She told us to get in her Jeep, that she would drive us down to the gas station and we could call for a tow from there. I did not want to leave my truck, but Nicole was already opening her door, and I knew she was right. We grabbed our phones and the thermos and climbed into the back of the Jeep. The woman, her name was Connie, she told us later, locked the doors the moment we were inside and did not waste any time pulling out of that lot. As we drove away, I looked back through the rear window. The gravel lot was empty, the truck sitting dark and abandoned. But at the very edge of the tree line, just for a moment, I saw him again, standing motionless, watching us leave. And even from that distance, even through the glass, I could swear he was smiling. Connie drove us down the mountain without saying much, but she kept glancing in the rearview mirror like she expected to see headlights following us. When we finally reached the gas station near the highway, she parked right under the brightest light in the lot and came inside with us while I called the police. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later, and we told them everything. The figure in the woods, the phone light, the way he had approached us, the truck dying for no reason. They took notes, asked us to describe the man, and said they would send a patrol car up to Ridgeline Point to check it out. One of the officers, a younger guy with a shaved head, pulled me aside and asked if I wanted them to arrange a tow for my truck that night. I said yes because there was no way I was going back up that mountain in the dark. The tow truck arrived around 1 in the morning, and the driver, a heavy guy named Sal who smelled like cigarettes and coffee, agreed to let me ride along while Nicole stayed at the gas station with Connie. When we got to the overlook, the lot was empty, no sign of the man. But when Sal popped the hood of my Ranger to hook up the tow cables, he stopped and called me over with a flashlight. Someone had cut my battery cables, both of them clean through with what Sal said looked like bolt cutters or heavy-duty shears. He showed me the ends, not frayed, not worn, but sliced at an angle, deliberate and precise. That was why the truck had died so completely, why there was no slow crank or warning. Whoever that man was, he had been in that parking lot before we even noticed him. He had walked up to my truck while we sat inside drinking hot chocolate and talking about bridesmaid dresses, and he had disabled our only means of escape. Sal looked at me with this expression I will never forget, a mixture of pity and something like fear, and he said I was lucky that Jeep showed up when it did. I could not argue with him. The police never found the man. They searched the area, put out a description, but he was gone like smoke. Connie told us before she left that she only drove up to Ridgeline Point that night because she had missed her exit on the highway and decided to take the scenic route home. A wrong turn. That was all that stood between us and whatever that man had planned. Nicole and I moved to Portland 3 months later, partly for her sister's wedding and partly because neither of us could stand being in Boise anymore. We sold the Ranger to a junkyard and bought a newer car with working locks and an alarm system. We never went back to Ridgeline Point, and we stopped watching fireworks from anywhere that was not surrounded by hundreds of other people. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that man standing in the gravel lot, watching us with those hollow eyes, waiting for something. I think about how calm he was, how patient, like he had done this before and knew exactly how it would go. I think about what would have happened if Connie had not missed her exit, if those headlights had come 5 minutes later, or not at all. The police told me a few weeks after that they had found an abandoned campsite in the woods near the overlook, a tent, some canned food, a sleeping bag that looked like it had been used for months. They also found a duffel bag with duct tape, zip ties, and a hunting knife with a 9-inch blade. No fingerprints, no ID, nothing that could tell them who he was or where he went. The detective who called me said they suspected he had been living up there for a while, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone like us. I thanked him for the update, hung up the phone, and sat in the dark for a long time. Nicole found me there an hour later, and we held each other without saying a word. Some things do not need to be spoken. You just carry them with you, quiet and heavy, for the rest of your life. New Year's Eve 2023 is something I still think about almost every single day. I had moved into my apartment complex in Atlanta about 3 months before, one of those massive cookie-cutter buildings where every floor looks exactly the same and every door is the same shade of gray. My unit was 4B, 4th floor, second door on the left after you exit the elevator. I knew the layout by heart, or at least I thought I did. That night, my co-workers from the warehouse had invited me to a party at someone's house in Midtown, and I figured why not, since I had no other plans and my family lives back in Virginia. I took an Uber there around 9, already a little buzzed from the beers I had at home while getting ready. The party was packed, loud music, people everywhere, and the drinks kept flowing like nobody was keeping track. By the time midnight hit and everyone was screaming and hugging, I had lost count of how many whiskeys I had downed. I left the party around 2 in the morning, maybe closer to 2:30. My phone was almost dead, barely enough battery to request an Uber back home. The driver dropped me off at my complex, or what I thought was my complex, and I remember stumbling through the entrance feeling that heavy drunk tiredness where all you want is your bed. The lobby looked right, same tile floors, same mailboxes on the wall, same elevator with the scratched metal doors. I pressed the button for the 4th floor and leaned against the wall, eyes half closed, just waiting to get horizontal. When the doors opened, I walked out and turned left like I always do, counting the doors until I reached what I believed was 4B. I pulled out my keys, shoved one into the lock, and when it didn't turn, I just assumed it was because I was drunk and my coordination was garbage. I tried again, wiggling it, pushing the door a little, and then I heard a click. The door opened. In my wasted state, I didn't question it, I just walked inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't my apartment. My place smells like the cheap air freshener I buy at the dollar store, that fake ocean breeze scent. This place smelled like cigarettes and something else, maybe fried food or old grease, but my drunk brain didn't process it as a warning sign. I just thought maybe I had left some food out or something. The layout was identical to mine. The small entryway leading into the living room, kitchen to the right, hallway to the bedrooms on the left. I didn't turn on the lights because I never do when I come home late. I just navigate by the glow coming through the windows from the parking lot lights outside. I kicked off my shoes somewhere near the door and started walking toward what I thought was my bedroom. The furniture was in different spots. I bumped my shin hard against a coffee table that shouldn't have been there, and I cursed under my breath. Still, nothing clicked in my head. I was too far gone, too tired, too focused on just getting to bed. I made it about halfway down the hallway when I heard movement, a shuffling sound, then a door opening. I stopped walking, not because I was scared, but because I was confused. I lived alone. There shouldn't be anyone else in my apartment. Before I could even form a thought about what to do, a light flicked on and I was staring at a man I had never seen before. He was older than me, maybe in his 50s, wearing boxer shorts and a white tank top, and he was holding a baseball bat with both hands raised like he was ready to swing at my head. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and I could see the fear and rage mixing together in his face. He screamed something at me. I don't even remember what exactly. Something about getting out of his house. Who the hell was I? And that's when my brain finally caught up to reality. I wasn't in my apartment. I was in a stranger's home, and he thought I was there to rob him or worse. I put my hands up immediately, trying to show him I wasn't a threat, but the words coming out of my mouth were slurred and made no sense. I kept saying I was sorry, that I thought this was my place, that I lived in 4B, but he wasn't listening. He kept screaming, backing me toward the wall, that bat never lowering an inch. I could see his arms shaking, not from weakness but from pure adrenaline, and I knew right then that if I made one wrong move he was going to crack my skull open. Behind him, a woman appeared in the hallway, probably his wife, and she was screaming too, telling him to call the police, asking who I was and what I wanted. The noise was overwhelming. My head was pounding from the alcohol and now from the panic flooding my system. I tried to take a step back and my foot caught on something, maybe a shoe or a rug, and I stumbled. That small movement, that tiny loss of balance, was almost the end of me. The man swung. I don't think he meant to kill me, but in that moment, with that much fear pumping through him, he wasn't thinking straight either. The bat came down and I twisted my body just enough that it caught my left shoulder instead of my head. The pain was immediate and blinding, like someone had set my entire arm on fire. I hit the ground hard, my face smacking against the hardwood floor, and I tasted blood in my mouth. I think I bit my tongue when I fell. The woman was still screaming, and now I was screaming too, begging him to stop, telling him over and over that it was a mistake, that I was drunk, that I got the wrong apartment. He stood over me with the bat raised again, breathing heavy, and I genuinely believed those were going to be my last seconds alive. I remember looking up at him and seeing this look in his eyes, this terrified confusion, like he didn't know what to do next. We were both trapped in this nightmare that neither of us had asked for. The woman finally did something that probably saved my life. She grabbed her husband's arm and pulled him back, yelling at him to wait, to not hit me again, that she had already called 911. I stayed on the ground, curled up, holding my shoulder and crying like a child. I'm not ashamed to admit that. The pain was so intense I couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except lay there and repeat that I was sorry. The man stood a few feet away, still gripping that bat, still breathing like he had just run a marathon. Nobody said anything for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two. I could hear sirens in the distance getting closer, and I felt this strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because the police meant this guy wouldn't beat me to death, but dread because I had no idea how I was going to explain any of this. I was drunk. I had entered someone's home uninvited, and from their perspective I was an intruder who could have been there to hurt them. The cops arrived fast, maybe 5 or 6 minutes after the call. I heard them banging on the door, announcing themselves, and the woman went to let them in. 2 officers came into the hallway with their guns drawn, shouting commands, and I just stayed on the floor with my hands visible because I had seen enough news stories to know how badly things can go when police show up to a reported break-in. They handcuffed me first, which hurt like hell because of my shoulder, and then started asking questions. The man and woman were both talking over each other, explaining that they woke up to find me inside their apartment, that they thought I was a burglar. I tried to tell my side, but I was still slurring my words and probably making things worse with every sentence. One of the officers checked my wallet, saw my ID, and then asked me what my address was. When I told him, he looked at me with this expression I will never forget, like he was trying to figure out if I was lying or just incredibly stupid. He asked me if I knew where I was, and I said 4B, 4th floor. He shook his head and told me I was in Building C, not Building B. Same apartment number, same floor, different building entirely. The complex where I lived had 4 identical buildings arranged in a square around a central parking lot. Building A, B, C, and D all looking exactly the same. Same brick exterior, same gray doors, same everything. The Uber driver had dropped me off at the wrong entrance, and in my drunken haze I hadn't noticed. I walked into Building C thinking it was Building B, went up to the 4th floor, found apartment 4B, and somehow the door had been unlocked. The officer asked the couple if they had locked their door before going to bed, and the woman's face went pale. She admitted they had come home from a New Year's party themselves, also pretty drunk, and she couldn't remember if she had turned the deadbolt. That one small oversight, That one moment of forgetfulness had led to all of this. The man who had hit me was sitting on the couch now, his face in his hands, and I could see his shoulders trembling. I think he was crying too. He thought he was protecting his home, his wife, his life. He thought I was someone coming to hurt them. The paramedics showed up shortly after and examined my shoulder. They said it wasn't broken, just badly bruised, but I should go to the hospital to get it properly checked. The officers took statements from everyone, and the whole time I kept apologizing, kept trying to explain, kept feeling like the biggest idiot on the planet. The man, whose name I learned was Gregory, eventually came over to where I was sitting on the floor near the front door. He didn't say much, just stood there looking at me with these tired, sad eyes, and then he said he was sorry for hitting me. I told him I understood, that I would have done the same thing if I woke up to find a stranger in my home. We just looked at each other for a moment. Two people who had been thrown into a violent confrontation because of a series of stupid mistakes and bad luck. Neither of us wanted to be there. Neither of us had meant for any of this to happen. But it happened anyway, and now we both had to live with it. The police decided not to charge me with anything. They could see it was a genuine mistake, and Gregory confirmed he didn't want to press charges. His wife, whose name was Marlene, even offered to drive me to the hospital, but I declined. I just wanted to get out of there, to get away from that apartment and everything that had happened inside it. One of the officers walked me out of the building and pointed toward Building B, my actual building, just about 50 feet away. 50 feet. That's all the distance between where I was supposed to be and where I ended up. I walked to my real apartment in a daze, my shoulder throbbing with every step, my mouth still tasting like blood. When I got to my door, I just stood there for a long time, staring at the number 4B, thinking about how different things could have been. If Gregory had aimed for my head instead of my shoulder, if he had swung harder, if they had owned a gun instead of a baseball bat, I could have died that night over a wrong turn and an unlocked door. The thought made my legs feel weak, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. I went to the hospital the next morning and they confirmed what the paramedics said. Just severe bruising, nothing broken. The physical pain faded after a few weeks, but the rest of it stayed with me much longer. I moved out of that complex 2 months later. I couldn't stand looking at those identical buildings anymore, knowing that one of them held a couple who would probably never forget the night a stranger stumbled into their home. I still don't drink the way I used to. I check every door twice before I walk through it now. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I think about Gregory standing over me with that bat, and I think about how close I came to not waking up on New Year's Day. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't some horror movie plot. It was just life, random and cruel, a chain of small mistakes that almost ended with me dead on a stranger's floor. That's the part that scares me the most. There was no villain, no monster, just 2 drunk couples, 4 identical buildings, and 1 unlocked door. If someone had told me that my first morning of 2018 would involve barricading myself in a bathroom while a stranger paced outside my door, I would have laughed in their face. But let me start from the beginning. I had graduated college the previous spring and landed my first real job at an insurance company downtown, finally making enough to split rent on a decent 2-bedroom apartment with my roommate Trisha. We had spent the earlier part of the evening at a massive house party thrown by a coworker named Jerome, the kind of party where you lose track of time and suddenly realize it is nearly 2 in the morning. When the crowd started thinning out and Jerome began making not-so-subtle hints about wanting to crash, a smaller group of us decided to keep the celebration going at our place. It felt like a great idea at the time. Trisha and I, plus our friends Andy and Simone, grabbed a couple bottles of champagne from the kitchen and called a rideshare. We figured we would watch the ball drop replays, play some music, and ease into the new year with people we actually liked being around. The problem walked through our door about 40 minutes after we got home. Andy had mentioned he ran into some guy named Wallace at the party, someone he vaguely knew from a flag football league that had dissolved 2 years prior. I never got the full story of how Wallace ended up tagging along, but suddenly there he was, stepping into our living room with a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a grin that seemed just a little too wide for the situation. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with a shaved head and these pale gray eyes that never seemed to blink at a normal rate. The first thing he said to me was not hello or happy new year, but a comment about how our apartment smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, and how that reminded him of his grandmother's house before she died. I forced a polite laugh and glanced at Trisha, who gave me a look that said she was already counting the minutes until this stranger would leave. None of us knew yet that he had no intention of leaving at all. For the first hour or so, Wallace was just awkward. He laughed too loud at jokes that were not funny, interrupted conversations to share random facts about himself, and kept refilling his glass even though nobody offered. He told us he worked in pharmaceutical sales, then later said he was between jobs, then even later mentioned something about a lawsuit against a former employer. The details never quite added up, but we were all tipsy enough to let it slide. What bothered me more was how he moved through the apartment like he owned it. He opened our refrigerator without asking, commented on the leftovers inside, picked up framed photos from the shelf and studied them too closely. At one point, he wandered down the hallway toward the bedrooms, and I had to call out that the bathroom was the other direction. He smiled at me when he came back, but there was no apology in it, just this flat acknowledgement that he had been caught doing something he knew he should not be doing. By 3:30, Simone was asleep on the love seat, and Andy was fading fast on the floor with a throw pillow under his head. Trisha and I exchanged glances across the room, both of us exhausted and ready for the night to end. I stood up and stretched, making a show of yawning loudly, hoping Wallace would take the hint. Instead, he settled deeper into the armchair and kicked off his shoes, revealing mismatched socks, one black, one dark green, and feet that looked like they had not seen soap in days. I cleared my throat and said something about how it was getting really late, how we all had to be up in the morning even though that was a lie. Wallace just nodded slowly, his pale eyes fixed on the television, even though the screen had gone dark 10 minutes ago. He said he was not tired yet, that he was a night owl, that he would just hang out for a little while longer if that was cool with us. The way he said it made clear he was not actually asking for permission. Trisha tried next. She was always better at being direct than me, the kind of person who could tell a telemarketer to go to hell without raising her voice. She stood up and said it was time for everyone to head out, that she would call a cab for whoever needed one. Andy stirred on the floor and mumbled something about crashing on the couch, which was fine because Andy was practically family, but Wallace did not move. He just tilted his head slightly and said he did not have anywhere to go tonight, that his roommate had changed the locks while he was out and he could not get back in until morning. The story sounded rehearsed, like he had used it before in situations exactly like this one. Trisha asked if he had any friends he could call, any family nearby. Wallace shook his head slowly, and for a moment his expression shifted into something that almost looked like pity, not for himself, but for us, as if we were the ones who did not understand how this was going to go. He said he would just sleep in the chair, that we would not even know he was there. His voice had dropped to something quieter, almost gentle, and that scared me more than if he had shouted. I pulled Trisha into the kitchen under the pretense of cleaning up. We whispered back and forth, trying to figure out what to do. Calling the police felt like an overreaction. The guy was weird, sure, but he had not technically done anything threatening. We thought about waking Andy and having him deal with it since Wallace was supposedly his acquaintance. But Andy was barely conscious and would probably just make things more awkward. Trisha suggested we just go to our rooms and lock our doors, let Wallace sit in the living room all night if that was what he wanted, and deal with kicking him out in the morning when we were sober and rested. It seemed like the safest option, the path of least resistance. I grabbed my phone from the counter and we walked back into the living room to say goodnight. But when we got there, Wallace was no longer in the armchair. He was standing in the middle of the hallway that led to our bedrooms, his back to us, perfectly still, like he was listening for something on the other side of one of the closed doors. I asked him what he was doing, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. Wallace turned around slowly, and for a second his face was completely blank, like a mask that had not decided what expression to wear yet. Then he smiled and said he was just looking for the bathroom again, that he had forgotten which door it was. The bathroom door was wide open with the light on. He had walked past it to get where he was standing. Trisha told him firmly that the bathroom was right there, pointed at it, and asked him to please stay in the living room for the rest of the night. Wallace held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender and walked back toward us, but he moved slowly, deliberately, making sure we had to step aside to let him pass. As he brushed by me, I caught a smell coming off him that I had not noticed before, something sour underneath the whiskey, like old sweat and something metallic. He sat back down in the armchair and picked up a magazine from the coffee table, flipping through it like nothing had happened, but his eyes were not reading. They were watching us over the top of the pages. Trisha and I retreated to her bedroom since it had a lock on the door and mine did not. We left Andy and Simone sleeping in the living room, which I still feel guilty about. But at the time, we were operating on pure survival instinct and not thinking clearly. Trisha pushed her dresser in front of the door, and we sat on her bed with our phones in our hands, too wired to sleep. We could hear Wallace moving around in the apartment, the creak of the floorboards, the sound of cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen, the refrigerator door. At one point, we heard him try the handle of the bathroom door, then the handle of my bedroom door, each one a soft click followed by silence. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Trisha texted Andy to wake up and check on things, but his phone just buzzed somewhere in the living room with no response. We considered climbing out the window, but we were on the 4th floor and the fire escape was on the other side of the building. So we just sat there, listening, waiting for the sun to come up. Sometime around 5 in the morning, the sounds stopped. The apartment went completely quiet, and that silence was almost worse than the noises had been. Trisha and I whispered back and forth about whether he had finally fallen asleep or left, or was just standing somewhere in the dark, waiting. We must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I remember is waking up to gray winter light coming through the blinds and the sound of voices in the living room. I checked my phone. It was almost 8. Trisha was already awake, her eyes red and puffy, and she pressed a finger to her lips before carefully moving the dresser away from the door. We opened it just a crack and listened. I could hear Andy talking, his voice confused and groggy, asking someone where his jacket was. And then I heard Wallace, calm as anything, saying he had moved it to the coat closet because it was blocking the heater. Like he lived there, like he had every right to reorganize our belongings. Trisha and I looked at each other, and I saw my own exhausted fury reflected in her face. This was over. We were ending it now. We walked into the living room together, and the scene that greeted us made my chest tight with anger. Wallace was sitting at our small dining table eating a bowl of cereal. Our cereal from our cabinet, with our milk, scrolling through his phone like it was any normal morning. Simone was awake now too, sitting on the edge of the love seat looking deeply uncomfortable, her purse clutched in her lap like she was ready to bolt. Andy was standing by the window with his arms crossed, and I could tell from his expression that he had finally realized something was very wrong with his supposed acquaintance. When Wallace saw us, he lifted his spoon in a little wave and said good morning, asked if we had slept well, mentioned that we were almost out of milk. I walked straight to the front door and opened it wide. The cold January air rushed in, and I told Wallace it was time for him to leave. My voice was shaking, but I did not care anymore. He looked at me for a long moment, chewing slowly, and then he asked where exactly I expected him to go. That was when Andy finally stepped up. He moved toward the table and told Wallace in a firm voice that he needed to leave right now, that this was not his apartment, and he had overstayed his welcome by about 6 hours. Wallace set down his spoon and leaned back in the chair, looking between all of us like he was calculating something. For a terrible second, I thought he was going to refuse, that we would have to physically remove him or call the police after all. But then something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition that he had pushed this as far as it could go. He stood up slowly, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and walked toward the door without saying a word. As he passed me, he stopped and leaned in close enough that I could smell that sour metallic scent again. He whispered that he had a really nice time, and that maybe he would see me around the neighborhood sometime. Then he stepped out into the hallway, and I slammed the door behind him so hard that the pictures on the wall rattled. Tricia threw the deadbolt and the chain lock while I stood there with my back against the door, breathing like I had just run a marathon. None of us spoke for a while. Simone left almost immediately, hugging us quickly and practically running to her car. Andy kept apologizing over and over, saying he barely knew the guy, that they had only played flag football together a few times 2 years ago, and Wallace had just appeared at the party and asked for a ride. He swore he had no idea Wallace was like that, and I believed him because Andy looked almost as shaken as we did. Tricia and I spent the rest of the day cleaning the apartment, scrubbing every surface Wallace had touched, washing the bowl and spoon he had used, throwing away the cereal box because neither of us could stomach eating from it again. We found a few things that confirmed our worst feelings about the night. The drawers in my bedroom had been opened and rifled through even though the door had been closed, and a small jewelry box on my dresser had been moved to a different spot. Nothing was missing as far as I could tell, but knowing he had been in there, touching my things while I slept just a few feet away behind a locked door, made me feel violated in a way I still cannot fully describe. We changed the locks the next day, and I did not sleep well for weeks. I never saw Wallace again, but sometimes when I am out in the city and I see a tall man with a shaved head, my whole body tenses up, and I have to remind myself to breathe. Some lessons stay with you forever, and the one I learned that night was simple. Trust your instincts when someone makes you uncomfortable, because the cost of being polite can be way too high. Colin showed up at my place around 9 with 2 bottles of cheap champagne and his girlfriend Whitney, who was carrying a stack of frozen pizzas like it was some kind of offering. Nothing crazy, just 4 of us total. The 3 of them plus my neighbor from 2 doors down, a guy named Frank who had separated from his wife a couple months back and needed somewhere to be that night. My place is a small ranch-style house at the end of a cul-de-sac in a neighborhood outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Quiet street, mostly older couples and young families. The kind of place where people wave at each other, but nobody really knows anybody that well. We had the music at a reasonable volume, maybe a little louder during certain songs, but nothing that would make someone angry. I had done this same thing the year before with 0 complaints, and my closest neighbor was Frank, who was literally sitting on my couch eating pepperoni slices off a paper plate. Whitney had just come back from the kitchen with another round of beers when we heard the knock. It was firm, 3 solid hits on the front door, the kind of knock that makes you stop mid-sentence. I remember checking my phone and it was 11:47. I know because I was about to text my mom a Happy New Year, since she always went to bed early. Colin muted the speaker and we all just kind of looked at each other. Frank made a joke about it being the cops, and we laughed because it seemed ridiculous. I got up and walked to the door, not thinking much of it. Through the small window next to the door, I could see a guy standing on my porch, maybe mid-40s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He had his hands clasped in front of him like he was waiting patiently. I opened the door about halfway, leaving the chain on because something about the way he was standing made me want to keep a barrier there. He smiled when he saw me and said he was responding to a noise complaint from one of the neighbors, that someone had called about loud music. I asked him who complained, and he just said it was anonymous, that he was not allowed to share that information. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like he had rehearsed this conversation in his head a dozen times before knocking. I noticed he did not have a badge, no uniform, nothing that would indicate he was with the police or any kind of official noise enforcement. When I asked if he was a cop, he paused for just a second, a tiny hesitation that most people would miss. and said he was with the neighborhood association. That did not sit right with me because I had lived in that house for almost 3 years and never once heard of any neighborhood association. We did not have an HOA, no community board, nothing like that. I told him we would keep it down and started to close the door. He put his hand on the frame, not aggressively, but firmly enough that the door stopped moving. He said he needed to come inside to verify the noise level, that it was standard procedure. That was when Colin appeared behind me. He is a big guy, played football in high school and still lifts regularly, and I think his presence changed the dynamic immediately. The man on the porch took a small step back, his eyes shifting from me to Colin and then back to me. I told him again that we would keep it down, that there was no need for him to come inside, and that I did not know who he was. He smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of expression someone makes when they are trying to appear calm, but are actually calculating something. He said fine, that he would check back later, and then he turned and walked down the porch steps toward the sidewalk. I closed the door and locked it, and Colin asked me what the hell that was about. I told him I had no idea, but something about the whole interaction made me uneasy. Whitney came over and asked if everything was okay, and I said yes, but I walked to the front window and watched the man. He did not go to a car. He walked to the end of my driveway and just stood there, looking back at the house. Frank joined me at the window and said that guy was not from around here. He knew most of the people on the street, at least by face, and he had never seen this man before. We watched him for maybe 2 minutes, which does not sound like a long time, but when someone is standing at the end of your driveway staring at your house in the dark, 2 minutes feels like forever. Then he turned and walked slowly down the sidewalk, disappearing around the curve of the cul-de-sac where the streetlight did not reach. Colin suggested we call the police, but I hesitated. What would I even say? Some guy knocked on my door claiming to be from a neighborhood association, and then stood in my driveway. It sounded ridiculous even in my own head. Whitney said we should at least lock all the doors and check the windows, which we did. I went through every room in the house, making sure the latches were secure. When I got to the back bedroom, I looked out into the backyard and saw nothing but darkness and the fence line. I told myself I was overreacting, that the guy was probably just some lonely weirdo who wanted attention on New Year's Eve. We tried to get back into the mood after that, but it was difficult. The music was playing again, but quieter now, and nobody was really talking much. Frank kept glancing at the front window every few minutes. Whitney was texting someone, probably her sister, and Colin was sitting on the couch with his arms crossed, looking irritated. I opened another beer and checked my phone. It was 12:03, which meant we had missed the countdown completely. I had not even noticed midnight passing. That bothered me more than it should have, like the whole night had been stolen by this stranger who had no business being at my door. Around 12:15, Colin said he was going to step outside for some air, and I told him I would go with him. We walked out the back door onto the small patio I have behind the kitchen. The night was cold but not unbearable, and we could hear fireworks in the distance from other neighborhoods. Colin lit a cigarette and asked me if I recognized the guy at all, maybe from work or somewhere else. I said no, I had never seen him before in my life. We were outside for maybe 5 minutes when Colin suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence. He was looking past me toward the back corner of the yard where the fence meets the neighbor's property. I turned around and saw a figure standing there, just on the other side of the fence, barely visible in the darkness. It was him, the same guy. He was not moving, not saying anything, just standing there with his hands at his sides, watching us. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Colin grabbed my arm and pulled me back toward the door. We got inside and he locked it immediately, then checked that the deadbolt was engaged. Whitney asked what happened and Colin told her the guy was in the backyard, or at least right outside it. Frank stood up from the couch and said we needed to call the police right now, that this was not normal behavior. I finally agreed. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my fingers feeling clumsy and slow. The dispatcher answered and I tried to explain the situation as calmly as I could. A man had come to my door earlier claimed to be from a neighborhood association, tried to get inside, and was now standing behind my fence watching us. The dispatcher asked if the man had made any direct threats or shown a weapon. I said no, not exactly, but he was clearly following us around the property. She said she would send an officer to check it out, but it might take a while because of all the New Year's calls they were dealing with. Drunk drivers, domestic disputes, fireworks complaints. She told me to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and call back if the situation escalated. I hung up feeling frustrated and scared at the same time. Colin was pacing the living room, and Whitney had moved to the center of the house, away from any windows. Frank suggested we turn off all the lights so we could see outside better, without being seen ourselves. It seemed like a good idea, so we did it. The house went dark except for the glow of the stove clock in the kitchen. I crept back to the window that looked out onto the backyard, and the figure was gone. The spot by the fence where he had been standing was empty. I told the others, and nobody knew if that was a good thing or a bad thing. For the next 20 minutes, we sat in the dark living room without saying much. Every small sound made us tense up. The refrigerator humming, the house settling, a car passing on the street outside. Whitney was holding Colin's hand, and I could tell she was trying not to cry. Frank had found a baseball bat I keep in the hall closet and was gripping it like his life depended on it. I kept checking my phone, waiting for the police to call or show up, but nothing happened. Then, around 12:45, we heard something that made all of us hold our breath. It was a slow, deliberate scraping sound coming from the side of the house, like someone was dragging their fingers along the siding. It moved from the front toward the back, taking its time, as if the person doing it wanted us to hear every second of it. Colin stood up and moved toward the hallway, and I followed him. We stopped at the window in the spare bedroom that looks out onto the narrow strip of grass between my house and the fence. We could not see anyone, but the sound continued, moving past us toward the backyard. Then it stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. I was about to say something when we heard 3 knocks on the back door. Not loud, not aggressive, just 3 calm, patient knocks, exactly like the ones on the front door earlier. Nobody moved. Whitney let out a small whimper from the living room. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, staying low, and positioned myself where I could see the back door without being directly in front of it. The door has a small window at the top, and through it I could see the outline of a face pressed close to the glass looking in. It was too dark to make out features, but I knew it was him. He knocked again, 3 more times, and then I heard his voice, muffled but clear enough to understand. He said he just wanted to talk, that he was not going to hurt anyone, that he had been watching the house for a while and he knew there was a woman inside. The way he said it, the way he specified that he knew Whitney was there, made my entire body go cold. Colin lost it. He grabbed the bat from Frank and ran toward the back door, screaming at the guy to get the hell off his property before he caved his skull in. I had never seen Colin that angry before. He was slamming his palm against the door, telling the man he had 5 seconds to disappear. The face in the window pulled back, and we heard footsteps moving quickly across the patio, and then nothing. Colin was breathing hard, still gripping the bat, his whole body shaking with adrenaline. Whitney was crying now, asking what the hell was happening, why this guy was targeting us. I called 911 again and told them the situation had escalated, that the man had come to the back door and made comments about knowing there was a woman in the house. The dispatcher said an officer was on the way and should arrive within 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes felt like hours. We huddled in the hallway, away from all the windows and doors, listening for any sound that might tell us where he was. Frank kept saying we should have left, driven away when we had the chance, but none of us had thought of that in the moment. We were too scared to open any door, too scared to go outside where he might be waiting. The police finally showed up around 1:15 in the morning. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking tired but alert. They searched the entire perimeter of the house with flashlights and found nothing. No sign of the man, no footprints they could identify in the grass. Nothing left behind. One of them asked me to describe the guy again, and I did, but I could tell they did not have much to go on. They said they would file a report and increase patrols in the area for the next few nights, but without a name or a license plate, there was not much else they could do. After they left, nobody wanted to stay at my place. Colin and Whitney went home, and Frank walked back to his house 2 doors down, though I watched him from the window until he got inside safely. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, the baseball bat next to me, checking the windows every few minutes until the sun came up. The man never came back. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. I never saw him again, never found out who he was or why he chose my house. I asked around the neighborhood in the days that followed, but nobody else had seen him. It was like he appeared out of nowhere, terrorized us for a few hours, and then vanished. I installed a security camera system the following week, but the footage has never shown anything unusual. Sometimes I still think about that night, about the way he said he knew there was a woman inside, and I wonder what would have happened if I had opened that door without the chain on, or if Colin had not been there. I try not to think about it too much, but every New Year's Eve since then, I make sure I am not home. Fireworks had been popping off since 9, and by the time the last one fizzled out over the downtown skyline, my phone showed 1:47 in the morning, January 1st, 2024. I had just turned 24 3 weeks before Christmas, still adjusting to life in a new city, after moving to Austin for a nursing position at a small clinic near the University District. My roommate Chloe had stayed at her boyfriend's place for the holiday, which meant our little duplex on Maplewood Lane would be empty when I got back. The party I'd attended was only a mile and a half away, hosted by a coworker named Iris, who had become something like a friend over the past few months. I could have called a rideshare, probably should have, but the night air felt crisp and pleasant against my skin after hours inside a crowded living room. The neighborhood between her place and mine consisted entirely of quiet residential blocks, the kind with neatly trimmed hedges and porch lights left on all night. I figured the walk would take 20 minutes at most, and the streets would be full of people heading home from their own celebrations. The first 10 minutes proved me right. Small groups wandered past, laughing and calling out to each other, some still holding champagne bottles and sparklers that had burned down to the handle. I passed a couple kissing against a mailbox, an older man walking a golden retriever, a cluster of teenagers taking selfies in front of someone's elaborate yard decorations. My heels clicked against the pavement in a steady rhythm, and I kept my purse tucked close to my side out of habit rather than genuine concern. Around the halfway mark, the crowds thinned considerably. The side streets grew darker, the spaces between streetlights stretching longer. I noticed footsteps behind me somewhere around Oleander Drive, maybe 50 feet back, but I told myself it meant nothing. People walked home on New Year's Eve. That was normal. I glanced back once, quickly, and saw a figure in dark clothing, hands in pockets, moving at roughly my pace. A man, I thought, though the distance made it hard to tell for certain. I picked up my speed just slightly, not running, not panicking, just moving with a bit more purpose toward the familiar shape of my duplex 3 blocks ahead. By the time I reached my street, I had almost convinced myself the whole thing had been in my head. The footsteps behind me had faded somewhere in the last block, or maybe I just stopped hearing them over the sound of my own pulse drumming in my ears. Maplewood Lane looked exactly as it always did, a row of modest duplexes and single-family homes, most of them dark except for the blue glow of televisions flickering behind curtains. My unit sat near the end of the cul-de-sac, the porch light on because I always left it on, the little ceramic frog Chloe had bought at a flea market guarding the welcome mat. I fumbled with my keys for a moment, my fingers clumsy from the cold and maybe something else I did not want to name. The lock clicked open. I stepped inside, shut the door behind me, and twisted the deadbolt into place. Then I stood there in the dark entryway for a long moment, just breathing, letting the silence of the empty house settle around me like a blanket. I told myself I was being ridiculous, paranoid, the kind of girl who watches too many true crime documentaries and sees danger in every shadow. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of water, and scrolled through my phone for a few minutes while my heartbeat slowly returned to normal. Chloe had texted me a blurry photo of herself and her boyfriend kissing at midnight, surrounded by strangers at some bar downtown. Iris had posted a story of the remaining guests at her party doing shots and singing off-key to an old song I half recognized. Normal things, safe things. The world outside my window was just the same world it had always been, full of ordinary people doing ordinary things on a holiday night. I decided a hot shower would help shake off the lingering unease, wash away the smell of cigarette smoke and spilled beer that clung to my hair and clothes. The bathroom sat at the back of the duplex, a small space with a frosted window that faced the narrow strip of yard between our unit and the wooden fence separating us from the neighbors. I had never given that window much thought before. It was frosted after all. Nobody could see in. I turned on the water, waited for it to heat up, and started undressing without bothering to close the bathroom door, since nobody else was home anyway. The shower felt incredible after hours on my feet, the hot water loosening the tension in my shoulders and neck. I stood under the stream with my eyes closed, letting the steam fill my lungs, thinking about nothing in particular. Maybe 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. I was rinsing conditioner from my hair when I heard something outside the window. Not loud, not a crash or a bang or anything dramatic like that. Just a soft sound, like fabric brushing against the exterior wall. I turned off the water and stood completely still, dripping onto the tile floor, straining to listen. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then I heard it again, a faint scraping noise, like someone shifting their weight on gravel. The strip of yard outside that window was covered in small, decorative stones. Chloe and I had complained about them a dozen times because they got tracked inside whenever we used the back door. I knew exactly what those stones sounded like when you stepped on them. And someone was stepping on them right now, just a few feet from where I stood naked and dripping in the steam-filled bathroom. I did not scream. I did not make any sound at all. My body seemed to understand before my brain caught up that making noise would be the wrong move, that alerting whoever was out there to my awareness might change the situation in ways I could not predict. I grabbed my towel from the hook and wrapped it around myself with trembling fingers, my eyes fixed on that frosted window. The glass was thick and textured, impossible to see through clearly, but I could make out the vague shape of the fence posts and the dark outline of the neighbor's roof beyond. Nothing else. No figure, no movement, no shadow that did not belong. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, barely breathing, water pooling around my feet and soaking into the bath mat. Then I saw it, a pale glow appearing at the lower edge of the window frame, faint and bluish, the unmistakable light of a phone screen. It hovered there for maybe 3 seconds before disappearing. Someone was standing outside my bathroom window in the middle of the night, and they had just checked their phone, or taken a photo, or done something that required looking at a screen. The realization hit me like ice water flooding my veins. I moved without thinking, pressing myself flat against the wall beside the door, as far from that window as the small bathroom would allow. My phone was in the kitchen, sitting on the counter next to my purse where I had left it like an idiot. The bathroom had no lock on the inside, just a simple door that swung shut but never latched properly, one of those minor annoyances Chloe and I kept saying we would ask the landlord to fix. I forced myself to breathe slowly, quietly, trying to hear past the pounding of my own heart. The stones outside crunched again, softer this time, and then there was nothing. Complete silence. I counted to 60 in my head, then counted again, my legs shaking beneath me and my skin prickling with goosebumps despite the lingering warmth of the steam. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I crept out of the bathroom in a low crouch, still wrapped in my towel, heading for the kitchen without turning on any lights. Every shadow in the hallway looked like a person. Every creak of the old floorboard sounded like footsteps behind me. I reached my phone and immediately dialed 911, whispering into the receiver as I crouched behind the kitchen island with my back pressed against the cabinets. The dispatcher asked me to repeat myself twice because my voice came out so quiet and shaky. I told her someone was outside my house, that I had seen a light at my bathroom window, that I thought someone had followed me home. She asked if I had seen the person directly, if they had tried to enter the property, if I was somewhere safe inside the residence. I answered no, and I think so, feeling stupid and hysterical and terrified all at once. She told me officers were on the way, that I should stay on the line and stay away from doors and windows. I sat there on the cold kitchen tile in my damp towel, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence of my empty house and the distant pop of leftover fireworks somewhere across the city. 7 minutes passed before I saw the red and blue lights sweep across the living room curtains. It felt like 7 hours. The dispatcher told me the officers were approaching the front door and that I could let them in when I heard them knock. 2 sharp raps came a moment later, followed by a voice announcing the police, and I have never moved so fast in my life to unlock a door and let strangers inside. 2 officers came in, a woman with short gray hair and a younger guy who looked barely older than me. I must have looked insane standing there in a towel with wet hair dripping down my back, stammering about noises and phone lights and someone following me from a party. But they took it seriously. The woman, Officer Dunlap, according to her name tag, asked me to show her which window I meant while her partner went outside to check the perimeter. I led her to the bathroom and pointed at the frosted glass, feeling embarrassed now, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing or blown some innocent noise out of proportion. She shined her flashlight through the window from the inside, illuminating nothing but the dark yard beyond, and I started mentally preparing an apology for wasting their time on New Year's Eve. Then her radio crackled, and the younger officer's voice came through, tight and clipped. He said he needed her outside, east side of the property, and something in his tone made both of us go still. Officer Dunlap told me to stay inside and lock the door behind her, which I did, watching through the kitchen window as their flashlight beams swept across the narrow strip of yard between my duplex and the fence. They found footprints in the decorative stones, a clear trail of them leading from the back corner of the property to the spot directly beneath my bathroom window. The stones had been disturbed in a rough circle there, pressed down and scattered like someone had stood in that exact spot for a while, shifting their weight back and forth. Officer Dunlap showed me photos on her phone after they finished documenting everything, and I recognized the pattern immediately. The same soft crunching sound I had heard, the same restless movement of someone waiting. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what the younger officer found near the fence line, half hidden in the shadow of an overgrown bush. A cigarette butt, still fresh, the filter stained with something dark that might have been lipstick or might have been blood. And next to it, pressed into the soft dirt beneath the bush, a knee print. Someone had knelt there in the darkness beside my fence, watching my house for long enough to smoke an entire cigarette down to the filter. The officers asked me again about the person I'd seen following me, what they looked like, how tall, what they were wearing. I could barely remember anything useful. Dark clothes, average height, hands in pockets. It could have been anyone. It could have been nobody. But someone had followed me home and waited outside my window, and I had no idea why. The officers stayed for almost an hour, taking my statement and checking every door and window in the duplex. Officer Dunlap gave me her card and told me to call if I noticed anything else, if I saw anyone unfamiliar around the property, if I remembered any other details about the figure on the street. She also suggested I stay somewhere else for the night if I could, just to be safe. And something about the way she said it made me understand that she was more worried than she was letting on. I called Chloe the moment they left, and she answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep and confusion. When I told her what happened, she went quiet for a long moment before telling me to pack a bag and come to her boyfriend's apartment immediately. I threw on clothes without really looking at what I grabbed, stuffed some things into my backpack, and ordered a rideshare with trembling fingers. The whole time I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see a face staring back at me from the darkness, expecting to hear those soft footsteps on the gravel again. The car arrived in 4 minutes, and I practically ran out the front door, locking it behind me and climbing into the back seat without looking back at the house. I stayed at Chloe's boyfriend's place for 3 nights before I felt ready to go back to the duplex. We installed motion sensor lights in the backyard that same week, and Chloe's boyfriend helped us put a lock on the bathroom door and a secondary deadbolt on the back entrance. I started carrying pepper spray in my purse, and I never walked home alone after dark again, not once, not even for a few blocks. The police never caught whoever it was. They increased patrols on our street for a couple weeks, and one detective called me in late January to ask if I had noticed anything suspicious since then. But there were no leads, no suspects, no answers. Sometimes I wonder if it was random, if I just happened to be walking alone at the wrong time and caught the attention of someone dangerous. Other times I wonder if they had been watching me before that night, learning my patterns, waiting for an opportunity. I still live in Austin, still work at the same clinic, but I moved to a different apartment complex last spring, one with security cameras in the parking lot and a doorman at the front entrance. I sleep better now than I did in those first few months after New Year's. But every once in a while, when I come home late from a shift and the street is quiet and empty, I catch myself checking behind me, counting the footsteps, listening for the sound of someone matching my pace in the darkness. Some part of me is still back there on Maplewood Lane, standing in that steam-filled bathroom, watching a pale blue light appear at the edge of my window and knowing with absolute certainty that I was not alone. The New Year's Eve I'm about to talk about happened during a phase of my life that was pretty uneventful on the surface. I was renting a small 2-story house on a quiet residential block, working long hours during the week and keeping mostly to myself. That night, my plan was simple: stay home, watch the fireworks from the upstairs window, maybe drink a beer or two, and be asleep shortly after midnight. I'd lived on that block long enough to recognize every porch light and every familiar car, so there was a false sense of safety baked into the routine. Everyone was excited for the countdown. Kids were running up and down the sidewalks, and the air already smelled like smoke from early fireworks. It felt like one of those nights where nothing out of the ordinary could possibly happen. As the evening went on, the neighborhood grew louder in waves. Fireworks popped in uneven bursts, car alarms chirped and died, and people shouted greetings across the street, like they were all part of one big shared moment. I remember standing in my kitchen around 10, rinsing a glass, when I noticed how often headlights were slowing near my house. At first, I brushed it off as people looking for parking spots or pulling over to let others pass. Still, there was a pattern to it that stuck in my head, the way the engines idled just a little longer than necessary before moving on. I told myself I was overthinking it, the way you sometimes do when you're alone and the night stretches out too quietly between explosions. Closer to midnight, I went upstairs to my bedroom, which faces the street. From there, I could see almost the entire block lit up by flashes of color, reds and greens bouncing off the windows and cars. I leaned against the frame and watched silhouettes move between houses, neighbors drifting from one yard to another with drinks in hand. Somewhere down the block, someone had a speaker blasting music that distorted every time a firework went off. That's when I noticed a darker shape near the side of my house, close to where the fence meets the garage. It wasn't obvious, just a patch where the light didn't behave the same way, like something was absorbing it. By the time another firework burst overhead, the shape was gone. Midnight hit in a blur of noise so intense it felt physical, like pressure against my chest. Cheers erupted, horns blared, and the sky was so bright it almost looked like daylight for a few seconds at a time. I stayed at the window, watching sparks rain down and smoke drift between the houses. That's when I heard it, a dull, metallic scrape from downstairs, completely swallowed by the celebration outside. Wasn't loud enough to stand out, but it was distinct, wrong in a way that didn't match the chaos of fireworks. I stood there, frozen in place, listening hard while the neighborhood screamed its way into the new year, unaware that something else was happening right inside my house. I waited until the noise outside dipped just enough for my ears to separate sounds again. Downstairs, there was a pause, followed by a faint click, like someone testing something gently instead of forcing it. My heart was racing, but my body felt heavy, like it didn't want to cooperate. I stepped into the hallway and eased my bedroom door open, careful not to let the hinge complain. From the top of the stairs, I could see the front door area lit only by the blinking glow of fireworks sneaking through the curtains. Everything looked normal at first glance, but there was a tension in the air that made my throat dry. I remember thinking how surreal it was that people were hugging and celebrating outside, while my house felt like it was holding its breath. I crept down a few steps and noticed the front door handle was angled slightly downward, not fully at rest. That alone made my pulse spike because I'm obsessive about checking locks, especially on nights like that. I stood there listening, counting my breaths, trying to decide if I was imagining things. Then I heard it again, softer this time, like fabric brushing against wood near the door frame. Whoever it was moved slowly, deliberately, counting on the noise outside to cover every mistake. Fireworks cracked overhead, bright enough to cast shadows through the window, and in those brief flashes I saw the outline of a shoulder pulling back from the door. I backed up without thinking, my foot brushing the stair rail hard enough to make a faint tap. For a split second, everything stopped. The sounds outside continued, but inside the house there was absolute stillness. I stood there halfway between floors, barely breathing, waiting for something to happen. Then the front door handle returned to its normal position, slow and careful, as if whoever touched it didn't want to leave a trace. A moment later, I heard footsteps retreat across the porch, light and controlled. I rushed back upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, phone clenched in my hand, staring at the door while the sky outside exploded in color. The celebration felt mocking now, like the world was laughing at how close something bad had come. When things finally quieted down, I didn't sleep. As dawn crept in, I worked up the nerve to check the house. The front door showed fresh scratches around the lock, thin lines that caught the light when I tilted my head just right. Outside, the fence gate was unlatched, and muddy shoe prints led from my yard toward the next house, then vanished on the sidewalk. A few hours later, neighbors started talking. 3 homes on the same block had signs of attempted entry, all during the loudest moments of the night. Someone had moved methodically from house to house, using fireworks and cheers as camouflage. I changed my locks that week and installed cameras. But the part that stays with me is how easy it was for someone to blend danger into celebration, knowing exactly when no one would be paying attention. Later that morning, once the street looked normal again, I walked the block with a couple of neighbors I trusted. We compared notes quietly, pointing out scuffed paint, bent screens, and the same kind of shallow marks near door locks. One house had a side window where the latch had been tested and left just slightly crooked. Another had a garage door that hadn't been forced, only nudged enough to see if it would give. The pattern was unsettling because it showed patience and planning, not desperation. Whoever did it wasn't in a hurry. They were confident the noise and lights would protect them. Standing there in daylight made the whole thing feel even more invasive, like our routines had been studied. By early afternoon, a patrol car rolled through, slow enough to notice everything, and fast enough to remind us there wouldn't be immediate answers. I explained what I heard and saw, careful to be precise about sounds, timing, and where the marks were. The officer nodded a lot and wrote things down, saying these nights were prime opportunities because people assume danger takes a holiday. It was strange hearing it framed that way, so calmly, when my nerves were still buzzing. After they left, the block went quiet again, the kind of quiet that follows something loud and ugly. People retreated indoors, doors closed earlier than usual, and conversations stayed short. That evening, I replayed the night over and over, noticing details I'd brushed past before. The way the headlights lingered, the way the shadows shifted near my fence, even the fact that my porch light had burned out days earlier, something I hadn't bothered to fix. All of it added up to a lesson I didn't want but couldn't ignore. I spent the next few days making changes that felt small but mattered. Motion lights, reinforced strike plates, better habits about checking the perimeter before settling in. None of it erased what happened, but it gave me back a sense of control. Nothing else happened on our block after that. No arrests, no explanations, just the quiet agreement that we'd all been lucky. New Year's comes around every time and people still celebrate the same way. Eyes turned skyward at midnight. I do too, but I keep one ear tuned to the house now, aware of how thin the line is between noise and cover. That night taught me that distractions don't just steal attention, they invite the wrong kind of patience. It ended without anyone getting hurt, and for that I'm grateful, even if I still check my locks twice when the fireworks start. That night unfolded during a New Year's public celebration downtown, the kind with temporary stages, food trucks, and countdown screens tied to streetlights. I was living in a small apartment a few blocks away, sharing the place with 2 friends, and life felt steady back then. Busy jobs, late dinners, and that fragile optimism people carry into a new year. We met a couple of friends at the event. Nothing wild, just drinks in paper cups and talking over music that bled into every street. When the fireworks ended and people surged toward the main avenues, we decided to walk back together instead of fighting the crowd. The idea was simple: cut through quieter blocks, get home faster, crash. I remember feeling relaxed, slightly buzzed, and ready to be indoors. None of us were in a rush, and that calm would make the shift later feel even sharper. The moment we turned onto the first side street, the city changed its tone. The music dulled into a distant thump, and the laughter became scattered, like it had holes in it. Our group stayed tight, shoes scraping against pavement littered with confetti and crushed cups. Streetlights were spaced farther apart here, each one creating a pool of yellow that felt isolated rather than comforting. Someone joked about how quiet it suddenly was, and another laughed too loudly in response. That was when I noticed movement behind us, reflected faintly in a dark storefront window. Shapes, not clear enough to count yet, moving at a pace that matched ours. I didn't say anything at first, convincing myself it was just other people heading home the same way. As we walked, the awareness wouldn't leave. I glanced back more directly this time and caught several figures trailing us, spaced out, careful not to bunch together. They didn't shout, didn't close the distance, didn't even look hurried. Their presence was defined by restraint, which somehow made it worse. When we crossed an intersection and took a sharper turn than necessary, I listened for footsteps changing rhythm behind us. They did. The sound echoed a beat later, delayed but intentional. One of my friends whispered my name, asking if I saw them too, and that confirmation snapped the last thread of denial. We weren't imagining it, and we weren't alone anymore in the way we wanted to be. We picked up our pace, not running, just enough to test the situation. The figures responded without hesitation, adjusting speed with us, still keeping that measured gap. Light from the next block looked thinner, and the buildings grew taller, squeezing the street into a narrow corridor. When we veered toward what should have led back to a busier road, the figures spread slightly, forcing us to stay straight instead. That was the instant the pattern clicked into place. This wasn't random overlap or coincidence. It was guidance without words. The realization pressed down on my chest as we were nudged farther from noise, from open doors, from anywhere help might casually exist. Every step after that carried the weight of knowing we were being steered. The silence between us thickened as we moved, broken only by the uneven rhythm of our breathing and the soft scuff of shoes behind us. No one suggested calling for help out loud, and I think we all knew why. Shouting would have meant stopping, turning, exposing ourselves. Phones were out, screens dimmed instinctively, as if light itself could betray us. I remember the smell of damp concrete and old trash, sharper than it should have been, like my senses were overcorrecting. The figures stayed just far enough back to avoid being caught in direct light, faces swallowed by shadow. outlines dissolving whenever we tried to focus on details. That distance felt calculated, like a leash held loose on purpose. We reached a stretch where the streetlights thinned even more, one of them flickering like it was deciding whether to stay on. Someone muttered that this wasn't right, that we should cut through a courtyard ahead to reach a more open block. As soon as we slowed to change direction, the figures shifted again, spreading wider, occupying the edges of the street without ever fully blocking it. The message landed without words. Keep moving forward. My mouth went dry, and every plan I tried to form collapsed before it could take shape. They didn't rush us, didn't threaten us, didn't need to. Control didn't come from speed or force. It came from certainty. At one point, I tried something small, almost pathetic in hindsight. I dropped my keys, letting them clatter loudly against the pavement, and bent to pick them up slower than necessary. The idea was to see if they'd close in. They didn't. Instead, they stopped too, freezing the space behind us into a silent standstill. That pause was worse than movement. It felt like an acknowledgement, like they knew exactly why I did it and wanted me to know they were paying attention. When I straightened and started walking again, they followed, footsteps resuming in perfect sync, as if the street itself had learned how to breathe behind us. We were nearing a stretch of buildings with no windows at street level, long blank walls that reflected sound in strange ways. My heart hammered so hard it felt visible, like it might show through my jacket. One of my friends whispered that we needed people, light, anything, and pointed toward a narrow passage that cut between two buildings. It wasn't ideal, but it was unpredictable. We turned into it suddenly, all of us at once, shoes slipping slightly on damp ground. For a split second, the footsteps behind us stopped. That moment of absence carried its own terror, heavier than pursuit, because it meant they were deciding what to do next. The passage was tighter than it looked from the street, boxed in by brick walls that trapped every sound we made. Our footsteps bounced back at us, distorted, making it hard to tell what was real and what was echo. About halfway through, we realized the silence behind us hadn't lasted. Footsteps returned, closer now, no longer bothering with distance. The figures had committed to the turn, their pace quicker, more confident, like the decision had already been made before we even acted. Panic shifted into something colder and sharper, the kind that forces your mind to work faster even while your body wants to shut down. I could hear someone in our group quietly crying, trying to keep it contained, which somehow made everything feel more exposed. The passage opened into a small service road with a single working light buzzing overhead. In that harsh glow, I finally caught clearer glimpses of them. There were at least 4, maybe 5, dressed in layers that didn't stand out individually, but blended together into a uniform of dark fabric and stillness. No one said a word. Their faces stayed angled just enough to avoid being fully seen, but their attention was unmistakably fixed on us. One of them raised a hand, not pointing, not waving, just lifting it slightly, and the others adjusted their positions without looking at each other. That small gesture told me everything I needed to know about how coordinated this was. Adrenaline pushed us to move again, this time faster, nearly breaking into a run. The road sloped upward toward a block where I knew there were residential buildings, balconies, maybe even someone awake. The figures followed, but now the gap was smaller, the intention less hidden. I could hear the scrape of their shoes clearly, each step deliberate. We reached a corner where light spilled out from a convenience store at the end of the block, its windows glowing like something unreal. Without speaking, we sprinted for it, abandoning any attempt at subtlety. Behind us, footsteps accelerated too, finally loud, finally honest about what they were doing. We burst into the light, breath ragged, nearly colliding with a couple standing outside the store. The figures stopped just short of the glow, their outlines retreating instinctively, as if light itself drew a boundary they wouldn't cross. They didn't scatter or run. They simply stepped back, melting into darker streets with the same discipline they'd shown all night. We stayed there longer than necessary, shaking, trying to explain ourselves in half sentences to confused strangers. Eventually, we took the long way home, sticking to crowded roads, lights, noise. To this day, I don't know who they were or what would have happened if we hadn't reached that store, but I do know this. They weren't lost, they weren't drunk, and they weren't curious. They knew exactly where they wanted us to go, and that's what still keeps me awake some nights.